Guten Abend, herzlich willkommen im Künstlerhaus Mousonturm. Im Namen des Mousonturms, aber auch im Namen der BAF-Bank-Stiftung, Stefan Mumme, hat dieses Projekt ganz zentral mit initiiert, was heute so zum ersten Mal rauskommt. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie da sind, dass Bonaventure und Arlette wir hier sozusagen in dieses Programm starten können. Und ich übergebe das Wort sofort an Stefan. Before I will say everything again in English so everybody can follow. Welcome to Mousonturm. From my side, I'm the director of Mousonturm, Matthias Bese. This is Stefan Mumme from BAF Bank Foundation, which is the main initiator also of this project, and I'll pass the word to Stefan.
Thank you. So I welcome you on behalf of the BAF Bank Foundation, which initiated this lecture series, Listen Attentively, so you can see with the Künstlerhaus Mousonturm and the Städteschule. Today we start with the first session. It's quite a bit private. Dedicated to innovation and improvisation. So we need improvisation today. I would especially like to thank our speaker, Ethel, for coming to Frankfurt. Unfortunately, Juliette Vaneri was not able to make her lecture as announced possible. For this, we managed to win Roland Fomundam at short notice, who is connected to us via Skype, for which we thank him very much. After the presentation, Tumi, Mogorosi, and Gabi Motuba will join us on the panel. Afterwards, we will be able to see them in a concert with the band. The discussion will be moderated by Bonaventure Ndikung and Arlette-Louise Ndakoze. Is it right pronounced? No. Curator of our series. Bonaventure is visiting professor at the Städteschule, and they both have invited these wonderful guests to join us. Why do we present this lecture series? A study entitled How Western Journalists Actually Write About Africa from 2018 by the Center of African Studies at Stanford University examined which word fields occur most frequently in reporting on the African continent. More than half, 55% of all reports, would contain words on social and political instability, directly followed by violence and death, 49%, corruption, 38%, and poverty, 34%. All negative topics. Only in fifth place follow progress and success. This reporting does not do justice to current developments in the African world. As we know, Africa is not a country, it is a continent of 54 states with many perspectives. We want to get to know them, and for this we should listen to experts from Africa. Listen attentively so you can see. One more note, the second session in September will focus on space, urbanity and economy. In addition to the lectures, new performances works by Kathleen Well and Nasio Mosquito will be shown. The theme of the third session in November 2019 is situated in knowledges, and we are still working on organizing an exhibition in cooperation with the University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. I thank you for your attention and wish us an exciting evening. Thank you.
So Bonaventure, I would like to invite you first, maybe to introduce us a little bit deeper into the concept together with Arlette. Yes, maybe. Later also because we record.
And also Roland is
Listen attentively so you can see. We are not necessarily interested in what the papers write. We're not really interested in what they think they know about Africa. We're not interested in that. In the seminal publication, Can the Subaltern Speak? Spivak actually posed the question, can some of us that come from the former colonies, can we speak? It goes without saying. But the more important twist is what Lecture-Louise Ndakoze made by asking, can the non-subaltern listen? It's not about if they can speak, it's about if the others can listen. So we want to engage in practices of listening. About a year ago, when Stefan contacted me for this project, I thought it was an interesting gesture. I haven't really done anything in Frankfurt besides coming to teach, but I thought it would be a possibility of engaging with Frankfurt. But the question is, can the Frankfurters listen? And how do we listen? The title actually comes from a quote by Sun Ra in his first album, in the liner notes of his first album. And he wrote, "You must learn to listen, because by listening, you will learn to see with your mind's eye." You have to learn to listen, because by listening, you will see with your mind's eye. We're interested in sharpening the mind's eye. A comedian once said, the worst place for a black person to exist is in the imagination of a white man. We need to sharpen the mind's eye. The idea of doing this series is not necessarily to present something to you, but to find possibilities of meeting each other. We want to talk to each other. If you learn how to listen within this framework, it's fine. But learning to listen is something that has to be trained. But the question is even more important, which I think is even more important, is how do we listen to the whispers? How do we listen to the rumors? How do we listen to the noises in the corners of the room? And when we learn to do that, how do we see the cobwebs? How do we see that which is never meant to be seen? So the idea of doing this series, instinctively, when I got the call, as someone trained in biotechnology, but practicing in the art field, was to do something that goes beyond just a lecture series. Because what is the notion of a lecture? To us, what Tumi, Mogorosi, and Gabi, Motuba are doing is also a lecture. Because we have to explore other spaces of knowledges. What is to us knowledge?
How do you listen attentively? How do you bring knowledge if it falls down or comes back? How do you bring it back? How do you put it in the room? How do you see what is not visible and yet there? How do you reach knowledge? In a documentary of 1969, 50 years from here, griot, scholar Amadou Ampateba, shares a wisdom on how to get to knowledge. And he shares a wisdom by the Fulani people who say, if you know that you don't know, you will know. So I can answer your question somewhere. The method is listening. If you know that you don't know, you will know.
One of the biggest mistakes that have been made in the past is to think of the ear as the listening organ. That's absolutely wrong. You don't listen with the ear. You listen with the mind. You listen with the body. The body is a listening organ you carry with you. How do we untrain the possibilities of listening? How do we sharpen our bodies? Every encounter is a possibility of listening. That is what we are interested in. So the people we are inviting are the people we think make Africa breathe, make Africa be. And it's not about looking at who appears on some list somewhere, who legitimizes what, but the people we think we want to listen to. Multifaceted, heterogeneous, multilingual perspectives of the African continent. Necessarily because we believe that the notion of Africa cannot be limited to the African continent as a geographical space, because we think of an African world, because we think of the various diasporas that go along with the African continent. So we are looking for spaces of communicating with each other and looking for other possibilities, multiplicators of these conversations. Consider yourselves as multiplicators.
We are inviting the ones who make Africa breathe in order also for ourselves to get to know what kind of world we live in and how we can make it proceed. So today we move towards the ones who move Africa. In order to get to know, we step back.
Louis Gordon once wrote that one of the biggest problems we have is disciplinary decadence. We are striving to get out of our own disciplines or to create spaces where people can meet when they get out of their own disciplines. What does that mean? It means creating different stages. It means creating the possibility where an Ethel Cofie, who talks about her practice in IT, stands next to a Roland Fomundam, who talks about his work in the agricultural sector in Cameroon, standing next to Gabi and Tumi, that do the music they do, that speak with the voices of the ancestors, and all, despite the fact that they're physically different spaces, but it's the same stage. So we want to think extradisciplinarily. We want to also find the possibilities of getting out of our own bodies, thinking of possibilities of the ecstasy, thinking of possibilities of stepping out of your body to be able to see yourself. That is what we are interested in.
Now, let us introduce the engine of this lecture series before turning to their pilots, which stand here in front of us, moving this body of knowledge around. So I would introduce the one who conceived this lecture series. It's Bonaventure, Dr. Bonaventure Soh Bejeng Ndikung. You were born in 1977, correct me here if I'm wrong, in Yaoundé, Cameroon, and you're an independent curator, author, and biotechnologist. Also, Bonaventure Soh Bejeng Ndikung is founder and artistic director of Sevi Contemporary Berlin. Almost 10 years of being in Berlin with Sevi Contemporary. You were curator at large for Documenta 14 in Athens and Kassel, and guest curator of the 2018, so last year's Dakar Biennale in Senegal. Together, now we project you, together with the Miracle Workers Collective, you are curator of the Finland Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2019, and you're guest professor in curatorial studies and sound art at the Städelschule in Frankfurt, which is here in this city. You're also artistic director of the 12th Rencontre de Bamako, a biennial for photography, African photography, 2019, so this year November, as well as artistic director of Sandsbeek 2020, a quadriennial contemporary art exhibition in Arnhem, the Netherlands.
Arlette-Louise Ndakoze, born in 1983 in Bujumbura, in Burundi, is a colleague and friend at Sevi Contemporary, a sparring partner, an interlocutor. We speak a lot, we reflect a lot, we exchange a lot. It's always very important to know you have somebody you can bounce ideas on, somebody who understands the spaces you come from and the spaces you want to explore. Arlette is a researcher journalist, primarily researching on sources of wisdom, knowledge, with radio being her medium of passion. For several years, Arlette looks out on artistic and intellectual movement in Rwanda and further African cultures, researching on philosophical disciplines, the literature scenes in the different countries, and on these ties that have been and are still connecting the cultures. As a member of Sevi Contemporary, Arlette cultivates Telling Trees, an informal storytelling series on sources of knowledge in African cultures, proposing the various communities in Berlin a place of culture building and living. And her research will take her to Senegal, I think next week, where she will be engaging with the different peoples and writers and artists on the continent.
Now coming to the pilots.
Today's first pilot is Ethel Cofie, Ethel Delali Cofie. We're extremely proud to have you with us, Ethel. It wasn't very easy to get you, I have to say, but it makes it even much a pleasure to have you around. Ethel is a Ghanaian entrepreneur and information technology consultant. I mean, you can find that everywhere. You know, there is no, cable network that hasn't, made a documentary on her work. After her studies in Ghana, in Great Britain, and the US, she worked as head of commercial solutions for Vodafone Ghana. Today, she is CEO of Edel Technology Consulting in Ghana. She founded the organization Women in Tech Africa, WITA. And I think we really need to take some time to think about that, which focuses on the entrepreneurial development and empowerment of women, especially in information technology in Africa. WITA wants to enable women to advance Africa's history of growth. And with this, I'll just say an anecdote. It must have been 5 or 7 years ago when I went to Nairobi, and one thing struck me immediately, which was the fact that everybody was paying with a smartphone. I had never seen something like that in Germany. Even in Berlin today, you can count yourself very lucky if you can pay the taxi driver with your card. And in Kassel, in the 2-3 years I worked in Kassel, there were 2 taxi drivers with a card reading machine. And you go everywhere in Accra, in Nairobi, or somewhere else, and you can pay all your bills on your phone. And I thought, this is incredible. And that struck me. And this is made by people like Ethel. And not only the fact that they do that, they also train people to do that. So while we are thinking of 5G in Germany, if it's going to come or if it's not going to come, if we're going to do it with the Chinese or not going to do it with the Chinese, there are people doing that thing there already, So thank you very much. Yeah. Okay.
It's the first takeoff.
Yes. You're the pilot now, huh?
Can I go up there? Is that okay? So maybe, actually I'll have this. If you turn this off, I'll have this. Then if I need to move around, then, is that okay? The people in the back, cool, okay. Hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm quite excited to be here. I'm normally in a room with business people. So this is very different for me, being in a performance space. This is very exciting, and I like trying new things, so this is a new thing. So I was told to tell my story. The thing is, when it is your story, you've told it multiple times, you forget sometimes, you think it is just a story. But I found over the years that telling my story has brought about interesting reactions in the room. And so I will do my best. I've got 30 minutes. I will do my best to tell a comprehensive journey from where I started from to where I am now. And I hope in that process, the thinking of what it means, what an African woman is, and what she's capable of will be shown in the room. Because, you see, every time sometimes when I go on an international stage and I'm speaking, and I say, my name is Ethel Delali Cofie. I'm a technology entrepreneur, and I build software in Africa. People almost don't believe it. Really? Technology? Africa? Well, let me tell you my story. So, I'll tell you the beginning of my tech story started maybe when I was 17, 18. So I just left high school, and in Ghana, it's a year wait between high school and university. And so, like any teenager, you wake up, you eat, you watch TV, you do nothing because you don't have school, you don't have anything to do. And my father decided that the devil finds work for idle hands. So I must be sent off to do something. So I think a friend recommended some sort of computer classes or something around. And so I went for my first class. And something struck me. So as I sat in the first class, the lecturer came, the lecturer said something. He said, the computer is dumb, you are smart, and you can make it do what you want it to do. Okay, that's a different way of thinking about computers. Also, computers are smart, humans are dumb. And I suppose that also fed into a bit of an ego of, oh, I can make it do what I wanted to do. I also always thought of myself as creative. I wanted to create stuff, but I was not arty, right? So I can't draw, I can't sing, I can't really do arty stuff. But I've always thought I was creative. And I think how this lecture explained it to me gave me the sense that I could use a computer and I could create this thing that didn't exist, right? And so I fell in love with computers. So initially, because I was good at math, I was going to go do, as it is with African parents, I was either going to go and be a doctor or an engineer in college, right? So the year wait there when the computer caught me unawares, I told my dad, no, I'm not going to medical school. I'm not going to do engineering. I'm going to be a computer scientist. I think my grandmother said, what does that mean? It's like, will you be a teacher afterwards? I don't think my parents even knew what it meant. I actually didn't even think very much about what that meant. Right? So I changed my application and I chose to go and do a computer science degree. But also I didn't understand that maybe women were not supposed to do computer science, something like that. Maybe that there were not enough women in the room, that I would be one of 4 girls in my class, and only 3 of us graduated. And that's when I began to understand a little bit about what it meant to be one of the only women in the room. And as I tell my story, you'll see how that has sort of affected my journey. So after I did my degree, I decided that I would do a master's. Everybody said, go and do an MBA. I was like, I don't want to do anything business. I just want to build software and do technical stuff. I don't want to do business. And they said, so I went and did, I went on scholarship to the United Kingdom, to a university called the University of Brighton, to do a master's in distributed system. Again, my parents were like, what is that? Do a business degree and then add the computer, and that's fine. I didn't come back home to Ghana, which was the plan. The plan was to finish my master's and come straight home. Because I got headhunted right out of school, so just as I was finishing my thesis. So I ended up staying in the UK for a number of years, working sort of in the sort of, London in the tech sector, building software, working with banks, working with sort of doing the business analysis, doing all the work. I worked in different sort of roles. And then, so you have to understand, I'm from a family of entrepreneurs. My grandmother, in her lifetime, ran about 10 to 15 businesses. Huh? She had a cold store, and she sold meat, she sold salt, she had all sorts of businesses. My father, who's an engineer by training, also years before decided to start his own thing. So I'm surrounded by people that run their own businesses. So I think it was always, for me, it was a matter of when. I mean, there's always a funny story that they tell about my grandmother about how one Christmas she had gone to get salt because you buy it from the I think northern part of Ghana, you ship it out to the south, and she hadn't come, and they were kind of waiting for her. And here on Christmas Day, here's my grandmother sitting on top of like a salt truck, a really tall salt truck, just riding into the village. And so again, I've always been surrounded by people who have made their own path and chosen their own way and figured out how to do their own thing. So when in the UK, one of the things that I saw more and more of is I was the only black woman in the room, right? You go into a meeting, and then I noticed things like maybe don't wear braids, maybe straighten your hair when you go into a meeting, maybe don't be, don't leave your hair natural as it goes to your head. Because, you can't walk into a bank with the head of the bank when you're going to talk to him, straighten your hair and look professional. And so maybe I began to think, maybe in order to rise, I needed to chart a different path. And I had a lot of ambition on what I wanted to do. And so I decided I wanted to start my own company, but I wanted to start a company in a place where I felt it, because I knew from watching my family that entrepreneurship is not easy. It's very hard, it's emotionally taxing, it's financially taxing, and it could go wrong. So I left the UK. I actually left my job, I resigned my job, and then called my mom and dad and said, I've resigned my job, and I've told my landlady I'm moving out, and I've shipped my things to Ghana, so I'm coming home. My mother was not happy. Why would you do that? You have a great job. You have a wonderful life, and you live in the city, and you're earning good money. Why would you come back home? Anyway, my dad always said, it's fine. As fathers do. It's fine. Come home. Whatever you do. So I came home and started my business. So I started out, I said, okay, I'm going to build software. So I mean, a lot of banks and organizations that need software, so I could build software. And I took all my savings. It was a year of just trying really hard and not succeeding. Right on cue. Just trying really hard and not succeeding. I couldn't get clients. And if you can't get clients, you don't have a business. And so after a year, I said, okay. And it was embarrassing, right? So it's embarrassing. You made these grand gestures. I'm going to take the leap and be an entrepreneur. And I'm going to, save the world and be the thing. And it just didn't work out. And so I said, okay, what was I doing wrong? It's like, I know how to build software. I just don't know how to run a business. I don't know how to get clients. I don't know how to do a pitch. I know how to do all the things that you need in addition to having the technical skill. So I went and I got jobs across Africa, which was really nice. I still have a good qualification and I had good jobs, so I could go in and get a job. So I worked across a couple of countries in Africa, learning. So I took a job in, say, business development, so I could learn about how to go and get a customer and and I took jobs in different roles. So my last proper job, as I always say, I was working as head of commercial solutions for Vodafone Ghana. And at that time, I felt, okay, so I've learned how to pitch to a customer. I've learned how to get new business, but I've got to start testing this out before I make the jump again. Again, you have to understand, I'm from an environment where it was fine for me to have failed the first time, and fine for me to attempt it the second time, which is not everybody that gets that opportunity. And in an environment where you have a lot of entrepreneurs who've done it over and over again, they say it's fine, it's okay, you can do this again. So my last year of working, I started the business again, but this time I would work on weekends and I would work in the night and I would go to client meetings on weekends and things, and I started to build out this company. So the second time I made the jump, left my job and didn't really like my boss in the end anyway, so it's just like, bye. It was vastly different. I already had clientele. I had a business that was growing. Then something interesting happened. I got invited to be part of a fellowship, the Young African Leaders Initiative, which was an initiative started by President Barack Obama that was supporting what they call Africa's best and brightest. So the 500 people from across the African continent were sent to America for a period of 3 months. And part of that was we would spend time learning an institution of learning. And then the other half, we would get to interact with the US government officials and get to make business contacts and things like that. And that was, I think, a really good turning point for my career. Now, while I was running the business, I thought, actually, let me try and do something about this sort of women, not enough of us being in the room, not enough of us standing up straight, right? Being in the technology sector, being able to speak up. Because you see, part of my story is that I watched my mother, who had 2 girls, be told that it wasn't enough that she had 2 girls. Why didn't she have a boy? And so I watched for years her struggle. And my parents did an amazing job in shielding us from it, but I think children will see it. You don't realize it, but she kept getting told every time we would go to a family meeting, I mean, you must have a boy. What are you going to do with girls? And so I always had this thing where I needed to prove to everyone, to all of them, that it didn't matter if my mother didn't have a boy, that we were enough. So, I mean, if you see the linkages of that, you'll see why Women in Tech Africa started. It was from a place of years of wanting to show that the African woman was capable and able. So when I went off, when we started in Ghana, we started with 70 women. So what I did was, I said, listen, can I find 20 women that are in the technology sector or young girls that are interested in technology? Maybe we can start there. So I put out, I sent emails, I contacted my friends, and I said, listen, I just want to do this thing. We'll start with like a little cocktail event. I was expecting 20 women, 70 women turned up. And there was no space. And everybody was telling their story and talking about their journey, and the room was full, and we were supposed to close at 8. At 10 o'clock, people were still standing and talking. Because you see, the thing that I felt, being the only woman in the room, suddenly there was somebody else that they could see, and they could tell their story to, and they could connect with. And we were lucky. So at the time, there were 2 really powerful women in the technology sector in Ghana. The head of Google in Ghana was a woman, and the head of Microsoft in Ghana, a woman. They turned up. And they turned up at this event, and they said, we wanted this. We've always wanted this. Thank you so much for making it happen. Thank you for creating this group so we can learn from each other and share from each other. So this group I also expected it to be a Ghana group. Honestly, it was just women, we learn from each other, we support each other. I always said, the men go and play golf and pass each other business and pass each other jobs in the bars. I mean, we can also create our own little girls' club. And that's how we went on. So when I went off to the US to do this program, I started talking about the work that we've been doing with women in technology. And at the university that I was studying, I was at Yale University, the university that I was studying, there were 25 Africans from 18 countries who are also doing amazing things, right? Because again, there's a 500 of Africa's best and brightest, something like that. And I kept telling them, this is the thing that I'm doing I think it's amazing. And they said, I know women in tech in my country. I can connect you. So we went from, in the space of, 3-4 years, we went from 70 women in Ghana to 5,000 women in 30 African countries. That exactly, to this day, because it was never, for me, I never had the vision that we would become this big and this large. And I think a few days ago, I was interviewed on something, and somebody was asking us, what does it mean to have these numbers? And I said, it's a show of force. It's a show that the African woman is capable and can do a lot of things. And maybe, psychologists say maybe I'm overcompensating, but the work in showing the world that we are building, we're scaling, we're innovating, we're creating in spaces, for me, is, I think, the most amazing part of my job. I'll tell you a quick story about when we first started to make it large. So I said, okay, let's see, can we get, people are over so many dispersed geographical locations, so can we do like the first Pan-African women in tech conference, but virtually? And so we put the feelers out, and we got a lot of press for it. And then we on the day of the event where everything is virtual, so we're going to do a webinar, the technology wouldn't work. The webinar wouldn't work, everything just, And I just remember feeling like, okay, so this is the most embarrassing thing that will ever happen to me. And this is like international embarrassment, right? So everyone's going to see that this was horrible. And then I said to the women, okay, this is not working. Maybe let's go and have the conversation online on Twitter. Let's make it an open conversation. And I think that's one of the best things we ever did. So for 2 hours, African women took over Twitter. And they were talking about technology and talking about what they did and the things that they were creating. And CNN called us. Because they said, wait, what? What is happening here? And so we got this call from CNN saying, we don't even understand what's going on here, but you seem to be the expert on women and technology. I was like, I'm not the expert, I'm just trying to do something. Well, can you tell us about what women and technology in Africa, what does that mean? Where are we going? What can we do? Right, so this started, this is why he's talking about there is no publication. This has started our journey of being sort of noticed on every platform, but it's always in service of raising the flag so that women all over, especially in Africa, can see what their fellow women are doing so that they can also walk the path. If I'm going too long, somebody needs to tell me when I cross the path. So today I do a number of things. So today with the Adult Technology Consulting, we have grown. We actually are doing well, considering how we started. We are one of the companies right now that advises Ghana's vice president on digital transformation and helping design the nation's technology strategy and where we should be going. So it's a really exciting place to be in. We are doing lots of innovations in Ghana at the moment. So in Ghana at the moment, we started a program that uses drones to shuttle blood from blood banks to clinics. So one of the big things is that blood, when needed in hospitals, sometimes does not get there quickly enough for people who need it. So Ghana government, one of Ghana government's projects is a drone program that enables blood, when it's needed, to quickly be put on this drone and sent to the hospital that's needed on. So I love the fact that the things that we're involved in are actually changing and saving lives. So it's not just fancy technology, but it's technology that is fixing the infrastructure problems that we have and creating solutions. Women in Tech Africa, we've done a bunch of things with adult technology. Women in Tech Africa at the moment, we're doing a lot of work with women technology entrepreneurs, because part of the discussion has been, every time they talk about African women entrepreneurs, they always want to talk about rural women, and that's a valid conversation to have, but it's not the only conversation to have. And so we started this journey of how do we amplify women that are building companies across Africa. And we started telling their stories and showing their stories out. One of the big things that is a problem is, of course, is funding, right? So if you were, I always say, if I don't know, 21-year-old in Silicon Valley gets $1 million to try a business. When an African woman will have to use her own resources and build it out. So one of the things we're doing right now is working to build a venture investment fund that will support these women to begin to scale, because I'd like to see multi-million-dollar tech companies built by African women. And I love the fact that every time we have the conversation, people's eyes light up, because you'll see that these women, if they were side by side with their neighbors who get funding immediately, they'll tell you that they have been able to use far less to do more. And so their ability to improvise and take a little and make it big is a skill that they've honed in. And the hope is that we will build this sort of venture vehicle and also a business building vehicle that creates a pipeline. So we're not just bringing the women together, helping them learn, helping them teach from each other, learn from each other, and helping them scale, but we will be part of the history of creating a movement of African women that are going to break barriers, that are going to be making changes in the environment. Because if you look at the numbers show that African women will put 70% of their income back into their families and to their households. So if you enable an African woman to go out there and to achieve, what you've done is you essentially pulled a whole generation out of, giving a whole generation economic possibilities, because she comes back around and puts money in her environment. So I think I've said enough. Yes, I think I've said enough. So yes, I wanted to share my story because there are not many stories like mine, and hopefully over time, as we do our work, we will begin to see more interesting stories of women breaking barriers from Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this journey and for letting us be part of how to get to somewhere where you imagined, but never let down. Actually, this not only the hope, but really the way to be on the road and doing it. So I would say we end softly here. Take a bit of seconds just to reflect, and then we move to Cameroon via US, via Frankfurt. Now we have someone who is not here, but here. He is visible in the space. You are our next pilot. What a good way to be a pilot. So welcome, Roland Fomundam. I will introduce you to our audience here. So you are actually a pioneer also. You pioneered the development and deployment of the first solar dehydrator in Cameroon. It's a very special technique for food. I'll let you explain that. And you also introduced the mechanical water pumps and green charcoal, corn deshellers, and of recent, the low-cost greenhouse technology through your company, Greenhouse Ventures, that you founded in 2014. So these cost-effective greenhouse farms have been instrumental in enabling farmers to produce food year-round. So it's good for the environment and it's lower costs. And it ensures continuous profits while saving, as we already a bit introduced the environment. You can explain us more on that, how? So, since inception, since 2014, your company has successfully introduced greenhouse farming to Cameroon and Cameroonians in a way that has attracted and engaged more youth in the industry than usual, something that was really unexpected also for you. So your models are now being emulated and replicated in other African countries like Uganda, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, and Ghana, where the company is currently carrying out studies for proper implementation. I guess you met already. So thank you, Roland, for being here, and we listen now to you.
Don't disconnect it.
So sorry, you just hear us, but you don't see us. Sorry.
Can I start?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, thank you guys for having me. Thank you to all the organizers and of course the audience being there today. Thank you, Cofie, for that wonderful presentation. Honestly, what I had in mind to present, you actually just took it all out. I think it makes it a very, very difficult thing to actually come on stage after a veteran like yourself. But nevertheless, there are several intersections that listening to you and, of course, the entire topic of today's lecture series makes me really amazed about the caliber of people that we have on the continent at the moment. Most amazingly is also the realization that, Cofie, you are also a tech entrepreneur. To be honest, you are the first technology entrepreneur that I have met from the continent. And that actually amazes me a lot. More so even that you are a woman. I mean, that even takes everything out. But notwithstanding, I remain very, very happy and grateful that, of course, I am sharing this stage with you all electronically. And of course, I certainly look forward to many more ways that we would have to connect ourselves. I will speak very slowly since I don't know how the transmission is. But again, if you miss anything, just let me know and I'll be glad to rewind the conversation. My name is Roland Fomundam. I am the CEO and founder of Greenhouse Ventures. It is my latest company I am working on. And just like my good friend Cofie, I am also a technology entrepreneur. To be honest with you, I left Cameroon in 2003, went to the US, and at the time, my whole idea was, okay, I wanted to be like one of my uncles. I wanted to be a pharmacist. Because if you understand something, for us Africans, our parents have about 4 or 5 main things that they want their kids to learn or to become. And that is a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, a pilot, a medical doctor, pharmacist, you know, those very typical roles. So for me, it was aspiring to be like one of my uncles who is a pharmacist. 3 years into pharmacy school, I realized that I wasn't feeling it. It wasn't what I really, really wanted to be. I was thinking of myself 10, 15 years down the road, how am I going to make that transition to be a happy man? How am I going to make that transition to have an impact on many more people? And how am I going to be that person that I believe that there is something in me that is greater than what I see or what I feel? And just on today's lecture series topic, I am so much amazed with the introduction that says that we do not listen with our ears. I may just modify that to say that we actually hear with our ears and we listen with our minds. Listening takes more than just an act of you receiving information. Listening is more about how do you unlearn or challenge what you already have in mind, but using that information to create a way for which many others can follow. And for myself, this notion of listening, of applying knowledge and wisdom into the narrative that has really defined Africa has been the basis of my innovations till this very date. Which, of course, I am just happy that I am sharing this audience, I am sharing this story with you guys today, because amongst you, I find someone that we have walked similar paths. To be honest, I never knew that there was some other person on the continent with a very similar background like what I have. And I just want to thank the organizers for doing everything that they could do to bring us on stage today. So my story, it goes that after school, the thing was, what do you do after that? You've gone to school, you learned, you have all this education, you have all these works, jobs looking for you. But for me, that satisfaction was not about how much money I could make. Because at a very short time, I realized that it wasn't about the money that one can make, but what that money can do or what impact you can drive with what you can make. So more and more, I started asking myself those questions. Who am I? What am I here for? What's my purpose in life? Am I just here to work for others? Am I just here to serve others? Am I just here to serve humanity? And if so, what service do I owe to humanity? How long do I have to live? What else do I have to do? What are my commitments? What will be said after me when I'm not here anymore? What will be my legacy? You know, these are questions that at the time I was very young, and amongst my friends, I sounded very odd. As a matter of fact, if you've ever heard of being lonely in a room full of friends, that was typical of me, even up to this very moment, because the ideas and the rationals that I've had to this very moment have always been very different. It is only until recent that I believe that I am getting even more and more understood, and even more so with my family. Fortunately and unfortunately, I come from a family that is not so entrepreneurial. I am the first in the family to actually run a business. So you can imagine how much I have been insulted, I have been sidelined, I have been negated as to what is he doing? Why do you go to America and come back and you want to do farming? What is it about farming you think you can change? We've been doing farming for over 500 years. What is it that you believe that you can come and do? Your friends go to America and they go become doctors, lawyers, engineers. You come to become a farmer. I mean, people for the most part thought I was repatriated back home. Many never understood what I was there to do. My mom, of course, my dad is of late. I wonder if he was alive right now, what would have been his position with me? I don't know if I would be here. I don't know if I would be doing what I am doing right now. I mean, all these questions, I am engaging with you because there are many of us that go through this. We don't even know who to talk to. We never know how to even address it. And many ideas like the ones that we are sharing with you today just go silent. So the narrative for us to start exposing some of these inner thoughts, to start thinking very intuitively, to start talking what our minds tell us, to start being very natural and being very adaptive to the cultures that we are in is just so relevant as we continue to seek to innovate and to change what I call the country, not the continent of Africa. Imagine if Africa was a country, not a continent. Imagine if we all was just one people. Imagine if we never had these different barriers and boundaries with 54 countries as we have them counted. with more than a billion people as we have them listed. Imagine if we spoke one language. Imagine if we had all these solutions that we could drive from North to Southern Africa. Imagine if all of this could just go as easy as we have it. Africa today would be so different from what we believe or what we see it is. That's a narrative. That's a narrative that we are looking to change. That's a narrative that we are looking to make great out of what it is today. And that's a narrative that my story seeks to bring to light. Imagine in a country like the United States, only 2% of the population are farmers. And they're able to feed 350 million people and even have excesses. America is the only country in the world where we throw food. Any one of you who's been in the US will know that we have a habit of always having food left in our plates. It's a culture, which I find it very hard. Even when I go home today, I never get to finish my food because of this bad culture I've learned here in the United States. But in a country or continent like Africa, where you have over 1 billion people, and over 65% of that population is involved directly or indirectly in agriculture or farming, but yet they are unable to feed themselves. That is a very big challenge. That is an oxymoron. That is unheard of. It's the only continent in the world that you hear that, right? And I believe that if we have to change the way the world will look at African, then you focus on this industry sector where it harbors the largest population, that hires the most amount of people, that provides food and income to the largest population. Does it make any sense that when a country in Africa has food crisis, world institutions like the World Food Organizations will go bring food from Mexico or America or Holland into Cameroon, for example, when you have a country like Ghana that is producing excesses? Where has the narrative about Africa been daunted to a point where nothing good can really come out of it? And these are the surprises that we get every now and then when we go out there and we want to talk about the things that we do. These are all thoughts that I get to deal with every day. These are all narratives that I get to narrate. And of course, I get to challenge the myth that many people still think that Africa is a dark continent, that Africa has nothing really good that can come out of it. So the idea was, first of all, how do we challenge that narrative? Then to be able to see what solutions we can bring. So I started, first of all, after I finished my degree in technology entrepreneurship, I said I wanted to have a particular focus where there is the biggest problem, and that was agriculture. And of course, because no one cares about agriculture anymore. Agriculture now has just been an industry sector where everybody comes, plugs in, and milks everything, because you have a population group that is, one, majority are not so educated. They don't understand the policies and rules that govern them. There's a lot of money that has been invested in this industry sector, and many people are not paying attention to it. So how do we challenge that myth that has always existed? So we started by developing solar dehydrators because we understood that Africa had a problem with food preservation. Imagine that over 45% of food that has been produced is being wasted in post-harvest losses. That was where we started from. And then we went to things like mechanical water pumps to improve on things like irrigation. Then we went on things like green charcoal to improve on things like deforestation, to improve on things like hazards from smoke, because a lot of people in these rural areas, they cook with wood. And then we went on things like corn deshalers. But I realized that the more and more, we were unable to sell these technologies at the right prices, because the population groups that we were selling to of course, do not have the financial capabilities to afford our technologies. So we were either bent on going for subsidies or going for donations, which of course doesn't make it sustainable. That's how the idea of the greenhouse technology came into play, when we realized that, okay, how come a country like Holland, which is smaller than most countries in the world, but produces more food than any country in the world? Think about that. How is a country like Israel, that is a desert, right now at the top of the agriculture producing chain? Then what of a country like Cameroon, that is called Africa in miniature, has the best climate? Again, don't get me wrong, someone like Cofie and other Africans in the hall, Cameroon has one of the best climates in all countries of Africa. How come we are not producing the amount of food that we need to produce? How come we are not economically stable? How come the farmers in Africa still go home hungry? How come are the farmers that die of malnutrition when we have all these resources that God has blessed us with to be able to produce year-round, make so much money, feed even generations, feed the entire globe? So there was a disconnection right there. That's how we came up with the greenhouse technology. And then now going on to customize it, to adapt it to our own local environments. Of course, you had price, you had value. So we took the technology from what it is or what it was, we brought it to what it is, and then we realized that, well, it's not only making it work, but also making sure that it could ensure profits. So how can a user who takes the greenhouse today make money from it a year after? That was my challenge. So we developed, of course, the low-cost greenhouse, which it uses wood instead of metals. It uses plastic instead of glass, and can last at least 10 years with a guaranteed return on investment after 15 months. No one has that. The secret of that was we developed a closed loop market where we are able to buy back everything any of our farmers could produce. So we developed a franchise model in farming. And people were so surprised. How does that work? But these are all things that, as an entrepreneur, you go to bed, you think about these ideas, and the next day you bring them to life. And we have gone through a series of new solutions over and over. Of course, we have failed so many times. We still fail, but of course, our failures are not showstoppers. Our failures are the reasons why we even succeed. When I give lectures, when I give motivational talks, I tell people that these challenges is like a workout to your inner mind. Imagine yourself in a gym and you take an additional dumbbell because you want to increase the strength that pushes your muscles. Imagine that every challenge you get as an entrepreneur is what fortifies your spirit to even go on and do greater things. That's how challenges in the area or in the space of entrepreneurship makes you even better and stronger and a conqueror. So we moved on from there. My first greenhouse, of course, I started it in my village, went back home, and everyone was like, how do you leave Boston, of all places, and then you go to your village? You don't even go live in the main city in Douala or in Cameroon. You go back right to your village. What's wrong? But for me, I wanted to understand. I wanted to live like these people. I wanted to understand them. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to understand the solution from a cultural adaptive perspective. What is it that makes these people think? Why are the solutions that have been defined in all these international stages by the UN? You have all these sustainable development goals developed from decades and decades ago. Why don't they work? Why all these donations that come into these areas? Why are they not successful? I needed to understand them. So it was more of an experiential learning perspective. Then we started developing it further. Our secret, of course, was we engaged students, we engaged universities, we engaged the local populations in driving, of course, the positions that we had in searching for solutions that were local, searching for resources that were local, and of course, coming out with ideas that were also local. And that is just exactly how we've been able to make successes, how it is today. And the key to it all was understanding, okay, agriculture that hires or employs the majority of this population, how can we make agriculture now an attractive venture to many people? If you look at Africa today, agriculture is still being practiced by the older generations. People who still go to the farm with the hoes and the cutlass, they still have to walk 10 kilometers. They still have to deal with the challenges of farm to market roads. They still have to deal with the fluctuations in price points. How are they being able to meet up with all these challenges? And those are the things that we have all been working on to make sure that we can minimize these challenges. We can now make sure that agriculture is fancy, agriculture is easy, agriculture is profitable, it is clean. And these are the things that have been driving us to this very, very moment. We have been able to standardize the use of the greenhouses in all parts of Cameroon. We have been able to build over 80 greenhouses at this very moment. We have been able to train over 200 youths, as we have them right now. We have been able to have over 15 franchise farmers. Right now, we produce over 500 kilograms of produce. And what most people didn't think is Africans are not ready for organic food. And I told them, no, everybody wants to live healthy and wealthy, and we have the money. So how are we able to create the products that you and me can actually consume and pay the price for? We should not only be exporting all that we produce to the white man's world. Do you know something? 10% of greenhouses in Africa, 10%, only 10% are owned by Africans. And out of those 10%, only 3% actually sells back to Africa. So everything that is being produced in Africa in greenhouses, all is exported. So Africans themselves don't even benefit from this. And that's a big problem. Whereas we have a market right locally. So we've developed a model where we are able to energize the local market. Today we have more demand than we can supply. It is what no one ever believed. When everyone is trying to export everything they produce, I sell to my next door neighbor. I have been able to make sure that the local Cameroonian now feels the need of consuming the same produce that everyone goes to the supermarket and pays 20 times the prices for. And those are the things that we have been doing to challenge the narrative. So today we are changing all of that. And of course, we believe that this narrative is what would go on and on to make sure that Africans can see themselves as the solutioneers rather than the guys with the problems. And thank you again for having me on this stage. I believe that this conversation goes on to change the many ways we see Africans and giving us a stage to enable many more to come on board and share their stories. Thank you again for having me, and I hope I didn't take longer than I was given. Thank you.
You definitely took much more time than we expected, but it was impossible to interrupt. So thank you very much for your brilliant presentation and very charismatic way of doing that too. Very fascinated. Now, Roland, I'll ask a question and then I'll ask the audience to pose a question. Because you won't be with us for the discussion afterwards, I wanted to use this opportunity to ask a few questions. Not that I'm just fascinated, but I'm also very proud of you as a young Cameroonian doing whatever you're doing, and the courage to do that in sometimes very difficult conditions. But the tendency is to, kind of focus on the difficulties of the conditions rather than thinking of the solution. So, and I see you as engaged in making solutions to the existing problems and even finding solutions for the problems that are to come. I very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you a question in relation to the system of subventions, which you didn't, maybe you touched on a bit, but you might say one or two words on that. So, just to share my story also, which I think it's also important to understand where we all come from, and what is the point of departure. So, my mother had as a side job, besides what she was doing, working in finance, in the post office, she had a side gig, which was rearing, chicken. That was in the 80s, the mid-80s in Cameroon. And it was a lucrative thing to do, a lucrative business. And I remember going back to Cameroon at some point in the late 90s and noticed that it was cheaper for people to buy chicken that was imported into the country than the chicken that was reared in the country. And I couldn't understand why. It was mind-boggling to me. And I started trying to understand the system of subvention, And it's not just the chicken, of course, you see that in sugar as well. We have one of the biggest sugarcane, farms. But, even the little sugar that comes from there is exported, while, worse quality sugar is being imported from other parts of the world, especially because of the fact that European farmers are extremely have extreme subventions in production of sugar, of meat, and so on and so forth. I wanted you to talk about that a bit, on the one hand. On the other hand, so the inability to work in that métier, even if you wanted to, because you have things coming in at dumping prices, That's the one thing. And on the other hand, the notion of developmental aid that has been kind of inscribed in the minds of a lot of people, especially on the African continent, that says that it is easier for you to take money than to produce. So I don't know if you have something to say about that. That's the first question, and then I'll just open up to the audience if any person wants to ask something.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And this whole idea of subventions, trust me, to be honest, it has been a very disturbing aspect in the areas in which we do business. And I will give a very, very small example. Right now in Cameroon, I am the only person producing colored bell peppers, so like the yellow and the red ones. I am the only Cameroonian producing those in Cameroon. Every other bell pepper you see anywhere is being imported from Paris, from Mexico, and all these other places. So when we started producing, we approached all these supermarkets and we said, well, we are now producing these things in Cameroon locally. Who wouldn't be proud that now we have red and yellow bell peppers that are produced locally? To my greatest surprise and dismay, they refused to buy my bell peppers. Why? Because they said the customers are not yet ready to consume Cameroonian grown bell peppers. It didn't make any sense to me. So the only alternative they gave me was, okay, Roland, we would buy your bell peppers, but we would have them listed as grown in Mexico, grown in Holland, for them to sell. Against all odds, everyone was like, no, Roland, you need the money sell, you need the money sell. This is the way the industry works. And I said, no, that is a problem that we continue to feed. We are not solving the problem. I believe that my products have a space in every shelf, in every supermarket. And of course, we went for about a year. We were unable to get any deal with the supermarket. But then one day, I went to the supermarkets and I realized that, but why am I struggling to sell to the supermarkets? Why don't I sell to these people who go and buy in these very supermarkets? And that was how everything changed for me. So we now developed a system where we actually do home deliveries. And then we sold for twice as low as the price that these guys would go buy from the supermarkets. Imagine that in a supermarket, you would buy a kilogram of bell peppers for about $26 a kilogram. It just didn't make any sense. So it meant that if you were poor, you don't consume the good stuff or the value stuff. And it didn't make any sense. We sell our bell peppers at $8 a kilogram. And the supermarkets sell theirs for $26 a kilogram. I deliver mine to home. Of course, you have to go to the store. Mine have a longer shelf life. The ones you buy at the store would only give you about 3-4 days shelf life. So we have actually taken away all the markets from the supermarkets. Now, what have we created? A reverse chain where the supermarkets now come to us to buy. Ironically, we have a debate now to make to them. Why do we sell to them? So we now have a shelf space in every supermarket that wants to host our products. And it is written there, grown in Cameroon, proudly Cameroonian, and that's a way that we've been able to solve that. So I never looked at that as a problem. I found it as a way for me to develop a new market that I was able to capitalize on. Right now, we are supplying over a ton of bell peppers every month. It's the largest order that anyone gets. And of course, we have refused to export any bell peppers because we believe that the benefit of this should not only go to those who are outside or those who can afford. And we've also been able to grow them at different value systems. That way, everyone at every class can actually consume this. So that is just going to the area of how do these subventions get to affect us. So for smallholder farmers or small business people like us, we have all these challenges, but of course, we always have to find ways to work through them. And our governments also are not making it very, very easy. We always have to, it's like an upstream battle where we continue to fight how do we make our own ends meet. Nobody's out there to invest in agriculture right now unless you are going to get like donations or subventions. And of course, once you go that route, like they say, he who controls the piper controls the tone. And that now leads us into developmental aid. When you take any amount of money in terms of developmental aid, you have to write a business plan. You have to say how it would be used. But of course, the way it is written is not the way it will be used on the ground. Those two, the theory and the practicals, is very different. But of course, those who read those documents, they want it because they have to report those documents to the higher-ups. This is the way it was reported. This is the way it is. And that's why for over 20 plus years now, all the amount of aid that has gone into Africa is not moving the needle anywhere to the right. And that continues to be a very, very, very big problem. Africans, right now, we have all it takes to think intuitively, innovatively, inventively, to be able to develop the very solutions that are culturally compatible to our own very problems. My mentor would always say, you can be the best carpenter in the world, but you need the house owner to show you where the roof is leaking. And I believe that it is time for us to be able to define the solutions that Africa needs today and going forward.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you so much. I was about to take a question from the audience, but I'm getting a signal that we are running late. So we will send you the question per mail. And please write as much as you talk so that I'll share with the people in the audience. You know, thank you so much, man. It's been a great pleasure. And this is exactly what we wanted to do, listening to Ethel and to you. And so, you know, art doesn't exist out there. You know, this to me is also art. You know, art cannot be separated from the sciences. You know, these are the consequences of the Industrial Revolution that say that we need to divide disciplines. You know, because to be creative, it doesn't matter in what field you are. So thank you for your creativity. Thank you for keeping it up. You know, thank you for thinking outside of the box, you know, for creating your own frames, for breaking the existing frames. Thank you for being what you are and who you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having
me. We come back from time and space to Frankfurt, and with Roland in mind, we will have a panel gathering of 15 minutes. So 15 minutes before we shift this space to another lecture, the final lecture of today, the ears, that will open our ears. So we will invite our pilots, Ethel Cofie, Gabi Motuba, and Tumi Mogorosi. I would take this time to introduce Gabi Motuba and Tumi Mogorosi. So you come today from South Africa, or the last days you joined us here, and we will listen to you fully just in a bit. To have a picture of you, I would start introducing Gabi, Motuba, and Bonaventure would then pass on to you, Tumi Mogorosi. So the full name is Gabi Sile Motuba, and you're popularly known as Gabi Motuba. And as a 24 years old jazz vocalist, born in Pretoria, no more, of course, it's past, time passed on, went on, so 27 or 26. Okay, so you studied in Tshwane. You're good in math, you will you'll tell me. Tshwane University of Technology, and you completed your studies in 2013. You first became introduced to the notion of music from primary school in Arcadia, where you began to discover your vocal abilities. After having completed your studies, you began to form a band called The Trip, with prominent jazz musicians based in Johannesburg and Pretoria. You were also part of the renowned album Project ELO, E-L-O, by drummer Tumi Mogorosi, who is next to you. You were part of that as a singer and songwriter. So you performed with numerous young, prominent artists of South Africa, such as Nduduzi Makhathini, Malcolm Diane, Mthunzi Mvubu, and many others. You're also working on a duo project, which is quite current, quite new, a duo project called The Wretched, and it is based on the book The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon.
Tumi Mogorosi is family. Before getting into drumming, he played the guitar from the age of like 13. And at some point, I think the guitar was too small for him. He needed the percussion. Now, I'm a great listener of jazz. I don't play any instrument, but I listen well. I listen attentively, at least. And in my opinion, you know, thinking of something like a genealogy of drumming, one would see to me in the line of someone like Max Roach. And I think it's a full mouth, but I think it is right. He's a mathematician on that instrument, but also a very brilliant writer. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think to be able to play the drum that well, you must be a brilliant thinker. At least you must be able to compartmentalize your brain. You know, you must be able to think, you know, strategically. And you see that in his writing. By the way, Max Roach was a brilliant speaker as well, you know. So I see that, I see you in that genealogy. At the age of 18, he went to the Tshwane University of Technology. In his early career, he began playing with the likes of Antile Yanana, the pianist, and the great Feya Faku, the trumpeter, and many more South African musicians. He's been playing, I mean, it's a very important part in the South African jazz scene, you know, which I have said that the most interesting jazz, in my opinion, today comes from South Africa and Finland. Whether you like it or not, that's my opinion. But he's also worked with others like Sinsiwe Dana, Samajubi, the vocalist, you know, Afrika Mkhize, you know, and Herbie. So we're very much looking forward to the lecture, the performance later after this conversation. But before we get there, we wanted to talk to you, you know, in this constellation, you know, about your practices, you know, about, you know, situatedness, you know, where you find yourselves, what you do in the spaces you find yourselves, you know. Also about thinking of communities, you know, not being, you know, the notion of the lonesome cowboy, that's, you know, passé, you know, thinking of creating structures like Ethel talked about. It would have been easy to just be the only person out there. But the question is, how do you go, you know? And I say that always. When I get invited somewhere, I come with a tribe. I don't come alone. I come with everybody. And that's how we do it, you know. So it would be great to talk about these things.
First of all, I'd like to say a big note of gratitude for the invitation and for the presence and for the capacity to have time to listen. Because I think, you know, thinking about this idea of listening, also with the project that we're presenting here, which we've entitled Group Theory, we're trying to think about the notion, to quote a thing from Glissant, in an interview with Daiwara, like the idea of the consent not to be a single being, right? Or rather, as fortunate as we were, like we had counsel with Saidiya Hartman, right? So I mean, just thinking through the idea of failure, right, as this incapacity to be single, right? The failure that pushes you to have conversation, the failure of thought from this sort of like an Eiffel Tower individual perspective, to the failure to be single, to open you up to be able to speak to people, right? And I'm trying to think about technology, right? And trying to think about sound as this technology, right? And how sound is a technology of the body, right? It's a signal of being, like breath, right? As a technology to life, right? But this breath has pitch, has. So I mean, trying to think about these things outside of the disciplinary sort of like decadence, right? And really trying to be undisciplined around these ideas of being in space and time. So how then sort of like notions like group theory, which fundamentally is the collapse of the composer, right? So I try to write themes, but these themes can be broken, right? So these themes can also be non-existent, right? So, but then how then to try to think about a moment where we get into a space and we co-compose, whether it be live or like, and then, so I mean, and these moments are then moments of being, right? The capacity to be not even human in the world, but then we're trying to look for something else because we realize the capacity of the human goes back to the individual. So how then to think about being in the world outside of the shortfalling of the optic illusion, right? The optic illusion that then always demands like a particular sort of like aesthetic sensibility, right? So how then to collapse this idea of the illusion to the idea of hearing and touch, right? So these become very important, I think, in the sort of like turn in thinking about space and time, listening and touch, right? And music and as a facilitator for that.
I want to pick up on two things you just talked about, which I find quite important, and pass it on to Gabi. One thing you mentioned was breathing, you know, which is becoming, I mean, which has always been important, but, you know, the precarity of breath, as Nathaniel Mackay has called it, you know, it becomes even more important in the moment where Eric Garner says, I can't breathe. But putting that in relation to singing, you know, breathing, the possibility of breathing, you know, the possibility of controlling breath, the possibility of reflecting of that precarity of breath. But the second thing is the notion of technology, you know. And right now at Xavi in Berlin, we're hosting an amazing artist from, one of the key figures in sound art of the 20th century and 21st century, of course, an African-American artist called Pamela Z. And she wrote an important paper called A Tool is a Tool, where she was thinking of the voice as technology, you know, the voice as an instrument, you know, moving away from, you know, the kind of, outsourcing of instruments, you know, looking at, the tendency of men to drive electronic instruments. But what about the voice as a technology? So I wanted you, Gabi, to speak about that as somebody who uses the voice also as technology, you know, and the notions of breath.
That's interesting. I think one of the ways I can connect the thoughts is what I found interesting, also what Tumi was mentioning, is the idea of failure. And how, when speaking about the voice, and how I produce the sound in which I can evoke whatever message, how that cannot be captured. So it fails to be captured in one moment. It's a continuation of burdens from the past and also possibilities that influence how and ways in which I relay these messages, you know. So that's how I think about the failures of vocalizing, a failure to sing, and using that process to think about the music, you know, to think about, like Tumi was saying in group theory, to think about composition, how failing in calling a person a composer when there's so many other elements that one uses to inform what has been put on paper, you know, whether it be an idea that is created collectively, or it be even ideas that you were given outside of that moment, you know, of composing. So what I find interesting, even when we're speaking about, I wrote it down, I wanted to speak, speaking about this idea of listening in order to see more clearly. So also speaking to that, it's that failure of seeing. You know, how can you ask someone to see something that is in motion or that is incomplete, you know? So I don't know if you want to touch a little bit on that as well and add. But that's how I think about, so it's not even a question of, it's not a question of who am I speaking to or what am I saying, but how does one quantify something that's incomplete? You know, that is forever in motion, that changes at every turn, even in one's, it's inconceivable, you know. So this is something that's, yeah, very interesting to me.
I would connect this with what we heard so far. When we think about people who are entrepreneurs, people who work with hard, we call it the hard science, something you think you can touch. We a lot of times don't think about what makes this visible actually. It's not this hard tech, but there are a lot of things around this that people can make use of it. So we very much consciously started this conversation on this panel with what is around it and make it grow, the arts, the sound, the invisible, and yet really that what the fundament of what can be visible then. So my question would go to Ethel, you shared with us how you got somewhere where no one had put you, and you made it even stronger by looking for people who might be in that space. So you really much talked about rooms where women were or not, only 3 women, rooms where no women or no black women were, where you thought you cannot be who you feel you are. So in which space do you belong to was always this question, and which space can you create? So actually I found it interesting in one interview of 2014 when you were asked to talk about the 3 terms that make your profession. You explained, besides persistence and hard work, of course, that it is awareness. So you said, I learned how to be aware of emotional intelligence, and I learned that working hard is not enough. It is important for professionals, women especially, to be able to walk into a room and be aware of who is in the room, the motivations of the individuals in that room, recognize the synergy and how to work with them. Once I realized that, it made things easier for me. I wonder, in which rooms are you now? How do you feel about what you do with women in tech? How do now women who enter or created that room receive people entering this room?
It's amazing that you found that interview.
You did some work.
Yes. Well, for me, the notion of spaces and acceptance into spaces and a seat at the table has always been important. I'm at a point in my career where I have a seat at the table, which is nice. But it's taken a while of barging at the door, sometimes barging in, sometimes dragging my own seats and creating my own space at the table, right? And I suppose that's part of my journey. The phase, though, that's interesting for me now is when I wrote that, I was at a different space because we were at 2019, so that was 5 years ago. I was actively in the fight for a seat at the table where decisions were being made that concerned my community, my life, my environment. Now, having that seat at the table, I am learning that having the seat at the table is not enough. It's not enough. One, I have to bring other women, or at least open the door and hold the door for other women to come through. Because when you're alone at the table, the conversation to have is harder. I'll give you a really practical example. I'm on a couple of advisory boards, and I will not name the advisory board. It's a high-level advisory board that was working on a strategic direction. There were 9 men, and I was the only woman. And I was saying, this strategy that we're putting together, we need to actively think through how it affects women and minorities and place that in the strategy. And the conversation was, but why? A human is a human. Why do you want to bring gender? Why do you want to separate? And I said, no. If I make it practical, I'm in business and technology. If I make it practical, for instance, if you're building a website, you must take into consideration that the people that are blind might use the website. And even though a human is a human, you must understand that there is a particular, thing that is associated with somebody. So you must design to include. You can't just say human. And so, because the average human, then that fits. And so, part of my learning now is that if I'm in the room alone, then it's very painful the job is painful, the job is a lot to do. But if I hold the door up and I can get more of us in the room, then when I pick a fight, someone else will support me and we can fight it. So I suppose this is my evolution. It's very interesting that you came up with that. It's just so interesting for me because it reminds me of my evolution in what I think I must achieve and then get there and you realize, no, there's more work to be done on the next level and the next level. So for me, it's important to be in the rooms, especially, and I would say especially as minorities and as women, where decisions are made about us. If you're in an African setting, where decisions are made for us all the time, without us being there, that it has become vitally important for us that we must be in the room when we're being talked about, when the decisions are being made about us.
Very good. So we have to close. We have to move to the next program. But just one last question, very last question. Permit me to do that because it's so important. The question you asked about the room and the space, and your answer towards it, Ethel, and first a comment on my side, which is something I've been trying to propagate, which is something that pushed me to create my own art space, in which now 34 people from around the world are part of it in Berlin, was the idea that I don't want a seat on the table, not on your table. I want to create my own table. We need to create our own tables, our own structures, and determine the way we want to live together and be together in these spaces. But that said, the question, and it's the last question, please give a very short answer to it. And it's a big question because it's about the politics of space, As because I'm asking, I want to ask especially Tumi and Gabi this question because, thinking of the space you come from and the politics and the politicization of that space, and thinking of the fact that, and in asking this question, I want to acknowledge Jürgen Lionhorst's presence in the room, who since 1986 was doing, jazz against apartheid, thinking of ways of solidarity, even outside of the country, because that was important also for the people that couldn't act within those spaces, thinking of all the members of the Brotherhood of Breath, the band that had to, the group, the orchestra, the collective that had to leave South Africa because they couldn't practice there, and had to go on exile, some of them at the age of 16 years old, most of them that died very early because they couldn't live outside. So how do we imagine those politics of spaces we find ourselves in? So, what does it mean to do music, to act, to be an artist within such spaces in our now? Knowing fully well that some things have changed, some things are the same, and we still need to negotiate those spaces constantly.
Thinking through the point of departure as the sort of like highly politicized sort of like spatial sort of like arrangements that South Africa is and Africa as a whole, right? But in thinking particularly from the South is the idea. Lefebvre speaks about space, right, and how by the social etiquette of the space determines the way of being in that space, right? So I'm thinking through again the idea of the undisciplinary within the space to sort of like refuse a seat at the table, right? But then how this refusal, this act of refusal, the politics of refusal, then itself opens up a possibility to create your own table. So I think the idea of space as a space, or the idea of being in a space with the agency to refuse the space is the capacity to open up a different conversation. Because I think for a long time there's been a conversation around the current space, right? But then the refusal of the current space then opens up possibilities of something else, or impossibilities. And I mean, and I think about this term impossibility as a very sort of like methodological sort of like tool to be able to think about failure as a methodology, but then failure as a methodology then brings you to the impossible. And thinking about Sandra again, you know, like we move from the impossible. This is where we move from, right? Because life was not given, right? Life is an impossible thing from where I come from.
In fact, Sonra said, until now we've been dealing with the possible and it hasn't taken us anywhere. Now it's time to deal with the impossible. Exactly. Gabi, you want to say something?
On that note.
On that note. Okay. On that note, I say thanks to you all. Thanks for coming, you know, making the journey to Frankfurt. Very much appreciated. Thank you, Arlette, for coming on this journey with me. It's a great pleasure. Also for the incredible research you did, and you know, she's fascinating. You know, she digs and finds stuff, in, you know, in all the holes, and fascinated and fascinating and fascinated. And also a lot of thanks to Matthias Pies for hosting us in the house. You know, Olivia for, you know, despite sometimes the very, you know, disjunctured kind of conversations, she was always keeping up, you know, and always in a very good mood, and, you know, thanks for that. And of course, Stefan Mumme for initiating this, for wanting to do something, and of course the institution behind you that enables this. We give thanks, and it's of course not the end. This is a transition, you know. So we're moving from one space to the other, and we'll occupy the other space downstairs and listen to Tumi, Mogorosi, and Group Theory. So bear with us, come with us. You don't want to miss this, definitely. So thank you all.